gentle listener, and welcome to Nocturnal Transmissions, the fortnightly podcast that brings you dark tales, both old and new, performed by your humble narrator, Kristin Holland. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, here comes Mr. Herribone! By Tim Jeffries. The head was never found. Jim glanced around. Had he heard that, or had he imagined it? All he saw were smiling faces. A phone camera flashed. He pushed on towards the podium. "Quite a crowd," Catherine, his agent, said from somewhere behind him. And it was true. Jim hadn't expected so many people to turn out just for him, and only a rope barrier and a couple of security guards to hold them back, to prevent them from descending on him, from tearing him limb from limb, because that's what they'd do, given half a chance. He knew that much. He shuddered. A woman at the barrier reached out to touch his arm as he passed. He felt another hand grab at his shoulder. He shrank inwardly, but kept smiling back into their stupefied, star-struck faces. Tommy had always resented Jim's fame. "It's all right for you," Tommy had said once. "At least you get the recognition. At least you get to be somebody. When I take the Mr. Herribone costume off, I'm back to being a nobody again. I walk down the street, no one gives me a second glance." Oh, but Tommy hadn't realized how lucky he was to be able to walk down the street. What a luxury. Tommy had never known what it was like to have people behave as if they knew you, just because they'd seen you on television, for them to think they could touch you, pester you, follow you, photograph you, uninvited. Mr. Herribone had saved Tommy from all that. That was the truth of it. It didn't matter if you were opening a supermarket, having dinner with your family, or attending your own mother's funeral. These people, the fans, they would appear out of nowhere, and they all thought that you belonged to them. And through it all, you had to keep smiling. That was the worst part. Keep smiling. Keep smiling. Don't let your public know how much you loathe them, how much you resent their intrusion. Don't. He was wearing it when he went in. Who said that? Again he glanced around. Again he saw nothing but a sea of transfixed faces. What was it these people wanted from him? He no longer knew. Somehow, without Tommy beside him, it no longer made sense. He, Jim Game, no longer made sense. Looking beyond them, he saw the sunlight twinkling off the surface of the river. The water was the green of avocado skin. Why was it green like that? And why had no one told him this event was happening on the harbour side, for God's sake? If he'd known, he would never have agreed to it. He'd be having harsh words with Catherine later. "My first public appearance since the accident, and you arranged for it to be at the harbour side? Do you honestly think what I want to see right now is water and fucking boats?" But even as he thought this, his smile never faltered. He wanted to get it over with. All he had to do was cut a ribbon and say his stupid catchphrase. Then he could pick up his check and get out of there. He was still a celebrity, still Jim Game, whether he liked it or not. That was what Catherine kept telling him. And he still had a living to make. From somewhere nearby he could hear music played on an accordion. Close your eyes and you could be in Paris, sitting by the Seine. But no, he hated it. The seesawing lilt of it made him feel sick. He saw how light reflecting off the water wavered and danced on the hulls of the moored boats. And suddenly he was back there, on that yacht. And just whose idea had that been, anyway? A party on a yacht out in the middle of the sea. "The show's been commissioned for a 3rd series, Jim. We need to celebrate." Yeah, but a yacht? Hadn't that been asking for trouble? In his mind's eye, he saw Tommy emerging from below deck. But it hadn't been Tommy climbing those steps. It was Mr. Herribone. Tommy stopped being Tommy when he wore the costume, stopped answering to his own name. Mr. Herribone took him over. Mr. Herribone staggered and clung to the rail, not because of the rock of the waves. Oh no, they'd all known that. It was because he'd had a skinful, because he'd been drinking since early that morning.
"I smell a beef,"
Tommy had said and laughed.
"I smell a beef! I smell a beef!"
His voice had taken on a note of hysteria. Tommy had the Mr. Herribone head-on sideways, but he must have still been able to see out of the eye-holes because he halted in the middle of the deck, legs splayed, a champagne bottle clutched by the neck, and pointed a wavering finger at Jim.
"There you are,"
he'd said in a voice thick with contempt.
"There you are, you fucker."
Up on the podium now, Jim shook his head to clear his mind. He didn't want to think about what had happened after that. Applause rang out. There was a squeal of feedback from the microphone. Looking out over the crowd, the smile dropped off Jim's face. Far back in the throng, he saw the face of Mr. Herribone. There was no mistake. How could there be? Mr. Herribone's head was 3 times as big as that of a normal man. The head, they said, was the reason Tommy drowned. If he hadn't been wearing the head. The sight made his jaw go slack. Had Mr. Herribone's features always had such an accusatory look to them? Had Tommy designed them that way? Why hadn't Jim noticed before? And then he blinked and there was no Mr. Herribone. Just a lot of puzzled faces looking back at him. But Mr. Herribone had been there, if only for a moment. He was sure of it. Taking a deep breath, he moved his mouth closer to the microphone. "I'm game," he said. Stupid catchphrase. There was a ripple of laughter, then the answer came back. Tommy's line. "I'm game if you are." It chilled him, but he had to get through this. Find a way to get it over with. When it was done and he was being chauffeured away from it, away from all those people, Catherine sat in the passenger seat of the car, turned her head and asked him why he'd hesitated. There was a hint of irritation in her voice, as if she was annoyed at him for his lack of professionalism. "I couldn't help it," he blurted out, still shaken. I saw Mr. Herribone in the crowd." Catherine sighed. "Oh, they'll still dress up as him, Jim. You've got to expect that. No, it wasn't an imitator, it was him, the real deal, the real Mr. Herribone. I know it was." "Oh, that's absurd. Tommy's dead, and you've got to stop feeling guilty. You only pushed him to get him away from you. He slipped because he was drunk as hell. It wasn't your fault. And he only drowned because he was wearing that—" "I never said it was Tommy. I didn't see Tommy. I saw Mr. Herribone. He killed Tommy, and now he's coming for me." There it was. He'd said it. Jim, the head was never found. Remember? After the funeral, Siobhan, Tommy's widow, had shown Jim a set of Polaroids. She said she'd found them whilst clearing out the drawers in Tommy's study. All showed Tommy, naked except for the Mr. Herribone head, engaged in various sexual acts with 2 blonde women. Jim had almost become angry at Siobhan for showing him the pictures, firstly because he was disturbed by them, to see that monstrous head atop that pale body, and then to see it doing those things to those women. It was nightmarish, ghastly. Secondly, because the Tommy he'd known had been a committed family man. In their early days on the road together before they invented Mr. Herribone, Tommy had called home every single night to speak to his wife and kids, whilst Jim tried to pick up women in the hotel bar. The pictures didn't fit with Jim's image of Tommy. But success had changed Tommy in all kinds of ways. Maybe it's not him under there, Jim had said. Of course it's him. Why would he keep them if it wasn't him? Tommy always claimed he never got any groupies. Tommy didn't, but clearly Mr. Herribone did. Well, think of it that way, Jim had said. Think that's Mr. Herribone in the pictures, not Tommy. Tommy would never do something like that. Jim, Siobhan said. Tommy was Mr. Herribone. Mr. Herribone had initially been created as a character in their comedy show, a bit-part player, a fleeting appearance. By that time, they'd been touring comedy clubs up and down the country for 6 years. Tommy kept saying their big break was around the next corner, but Jim was tired and ready to call it quits. He'd begun to think about trying his hand at acting. A theatrical agent had once handed him a card after a gig, telling him, "With your looks, you could be the next Marlon Brando." But there'd been a proviso. He would have to ditch Tommy Scott. The double act was going nowhere, the agent said. At the time, Jim had shrugged and said, "Sorry, we come as a unit." But later, after one particular show where only 2 people had turned out to see them, he regretted it. He'd never told Tommy about this, but Tommy must have sensed it somehow. He'd gone away, and when he came back, he had something new. Mr. Herribone. Mr. Herribone was a clownish character with an outsized stuffed sackcloth head, against whom Jim was forced to become more of a straight man, going on stage first and announcing Tommy with a cry of, "Here comes Mr. Herribone!" Mr. Herribone had catchphrases of his own. "I smell a beef," and "That's rubbed your goat." He performed pratfalls and did ludicrous song and dance routines. Mr. Herribone got laughs, so he became a bigger and bigger part of their act. The clubs were filling up. Before long, they were playing to a packed house. Suddenly, they had a manager and PR people. The venues got bigger. One day, Jim was walking down the street, and to his utter shock, a man passed him wearing that shirt, on which was written the words, "I smell a beef." Oh my God, he'd thought at the time. Tommy was right. We've made it. I never should have doubted him. But on stage, Tommy was gone. Tommy was no more. There was only himself, Jim Game, and his new partner, Mr. Herribone. Can you believe what's happened to us? Jim said to Tommy one day, on a rare occasion when he chanced upon him without the costume. He promised he would, Tommy said. He looked distant and fatigued, drained somehow. Who promised? Tommy laughed and said, Why, Mr. Herribone, of course. We made a deal. He said all this success would come to us. Tommy, Jim said, Mr. Herribone is your creation. Tommy had looked confused at this. What do you mean? You're talking about Mr. Herribone as if he's a real person. You made the Mr. Herribone costume, didn't you? The head. You invented him. Tommy shook his head. Jim, I found that head in the back room of some theatre we played, amongst a load of old drapes and stuff. And I didn't invent Mr. Herribone. He came to me. He told me we could have all the success we'd been chasing for so long. All I had to do was... He never got to finish that sentence, and Jim never got to ask him what it meant. Jim's mobile phone rang. It was their agent, Catherine, with the news that they'd been offered a TV show. They were both so excited that this odd, disturbing conversation was immediately forgotten. Jim remembered it much later, after Tommy died. Why had Tommy referred to Mr. Herribone as if he were a real person? Was he joking? Or had his mental health already started to fracture? Or... They'd got working on the TV show within days, and nothing could have prepared Jim for how things escalated after that. Jim had a recurring dream that he woke up just as he normally did, but when he went into the bathroom and looked into the mirror, it was Mr. Herribone he saw staring back at him rather than his own features. That big sackcloth face with huge mismatched eyes stitched onto it, and a big leering grin. The head, too big, alarmingly big, crowding the mirror. Always he woke with a clutch of breath and immediately put his hands to his face to feel what was there. Flesh, smooth flesh, not rough sackcloth, please, not that. To assure himself that he was still Jim game. Then, lying back on the pillows and almost sobbing with relief, he would think about Tommy's last words. He'd had Jim backed up against the handrail of the yacht, holding him there with one hand pressed against his chest, whilst with his other hand he struggled in an apparent attempt to lift off the Mr. Herribone head. The women Jim had been chatting pleasantly with a moment before had scattered.
"I've had enough, Jim,"
Tommy had said.
"It's your turn now. Your turn to be Mr. fucking Herribone, and I'll be the face everyone recognizes. I'll be the one all the women want to screw."
"You've got a wife, Tommy. Remember her? Remember Siobhan?"
"Fuck you, Jim Game."
"No, Tommy. Fuck you!" Jim had pushed Tommy backwards. To an onlooker, it might have looked as if he were reacting against Tommy's threat, the threat of having to become Mr. Herribone. But really, he just wanted to get away, out from under Tommy's drunken aggression. He pushed Tommy, and Tommy staggered backwards. It was the weight of the Mr. Herribone head that dragged Tommy over the rail of the yacht. Jim had replayed that moment over and over in his mind, many times since. He had rushed to the rail and seen Tommy hit the water, the Mr. Herribone head grinning up at him as Tommy flailed his arms and struggled for a moment at the churned water in the yacht's wake. Behind Jim, people were shouting and running back and forth across the deck. They were screaming. Someone threw a life preserver. But when Jim looked again, desperately running his gaze back and forth over the surface of the sea, Tommy was nowhere to be seen. Tommy's body had washed up on a beach in Devon 2 days later, minus the Mr. Herribone head. On hearing the news, Jim's first thought had been an odd one. Thank God, he'd thought. Thank God he's finally free of him. In Catherine's office, he sat clasping his hands together and gazed at the empty chair beside him. "So, what's next, Jim?" Catherine said. "Have you had any thoughts about what you'd like to do now?" Jim met her eyes. "You know," he said, "when we finally made it big, Tommy and I found myself missing the old days. Those early days we spent on the road together, they were special. I didn't realize it at the time. I thought we were getting nowhere. But those times were really the best times." He sat up and leant forward. "We had something, a friendship, a real friendship, a real respect. Shit. We loved each other." Catherine raised one eyebrow. I don't mean we were in love, don't get me wrong. I just mean we loved each other as friends. I don't think I'd ever had a friend like that before. And when we were on stage, we played off each other. It was all so easy and natural. It flowed out of us. I think we had more fun than any audience ever did." "So, what are you saying, Jim?" Catherine said. "I'm telling you that the best friend I ever had in this world is dead." "So," Catherine said after a pause, "you want me to find you a new partner?" Jim laughed bitterly and shook his head. No. It wouldn't. It couldn't ever be the same. "You know," Catherine said, there was trepidation in her tone, "I've been speaking to a director friend of mine. Didn't you always say you wanted to try acting?" "Me? An actor? Why not?" Catherine said. "You could be a movie star, Jim." Wooden. The word haunted Jim. It was the first thought he had when he woke up in the morning, and the last word to pass through his mind when he went to sleep at night. Wooden. In his new film, Travelling Light, one-time comedian Jim Game gives a performance so wooden he could make a fence post envious. Jim Game's to acting what a tin of matte emulsion and a paint roller are to the world of art restoration. Watching Jim Game trying to act makes you wish he was the one who fell off that yacht. In they came, the reviews, each one more stinging than the last, the words astounding in their malice, in their cruelty. He rang Catherine, but was told time and time again that she was busy, or she was out of the office, or she was with a client. Nadine, his latest girlfriend, wouldn't answer her phone either. He had to speak to someone. He had a sister somewhere, Angie, but he hadn't spoken to her in years. "That's the fame game," Catherine said when he at last managed to get through to her. "First they build you up, then they knock you down. So, what do I do now?" Catherine was silent a moment. "Perhaps you should stick to what you're best at." "And what's that?" Jim pleaded. "Getting up on stage in front of people," she said. "What you've always done." He wrinkled his brow, turned his hands palm up. "What?" What? Comedy, she said. He could hear them calling for him, but he didn't stand. Instead, he folded himself over so that his forehead touched his knees and clasped his hands behind his head. Pushing one foot forward, he braced it against the cubicle door, as if he thought someone might try and force it open. He knew he couldn't stay there forever, but he wished he could. But for the steady, reassuring drip of a tap, it was quiet there. But they would find him eventually. He knew that. They would come and coax him out and force him up on stage. "Mr. Game, sir?" He froze. He held his breath. Perhaps if he stayed very still, they would leave him alone. A knock on the cubicle door. "Mr. Game, sir, are you in there?" "What?" he said, half sitting up. "What is it?" "It's showtime, sir." He took a deep breath. Then, standing, he drew back the bolt on the door and opened it a few inches. A concerned face peered in at him. "We've looked everywhere for you, sir," the young man said. Jim fixed a smile on his face. "Sorry, last-minute nerves." He glanced into the face in front of him and realized the young man recognized the lie. "You shouldn't let a few bad reviews bother you, Mr. Game," the young man said. "You're still a legend." Jim laughed and opened the door fully. "It's not just the reviews," he wanted to say. "It's playing to a half-empty house every night." For the first 2 or 3 dates of the tour, he'd played to packed theatres. Then, as the reviews started to come in, he saw his audience dwindle. What he was doing was a departure, certainly. Hadn't Catherine said it was a risk? He'd wanted to do a more sophisticated kind of comedy than he and Tommy used to do. Comedy with a political slant. Comedy that addressed real issues. It was what he'd always envisioned himself doing. Comedy that was intelligent, that meant something, made a difference. The previous night he'd played one of the smaller venues he'd been booked for, but the place had been barely half full. It had depressed him, looking out onto all those empty seats. Gag after gag fell flat. It felt that he was drowning. The worst thing was that he still had 11 more shows to do, and he was certain that by the end he'd be playing to an empty room. A drink, that's what he needed. A drink. "I mean it," the young man said, perhaps noticing the doubt on Jim's face. "I'm a big fan of yours, actually." "Thank you. You're very kind." Jim emerged from the cubicle. "Well, I suppose I'd better get out there. May I visit my dressing room first?" "Of course, Mr. Game. They haven't announced you yet." Jim left the toilets and hurried to his dressing room. The young man trailed him. Perhaps someone had told him not to let Jim out of his sights, as if Jim might make a run for it. "I'll only be a moment," Jim said when he reached his dressing room door. The young man nodded, then stood against the wall with his arms crossed in front of him. "So it's true," Jim thought. "He doesn't want to let me out of his sights. Someone's expecting me to bail." He wondered if the things the young man had said about being a fan were true. Probably not. Probably it was just spiel to get him out on stage. "You're still a legend. Ha!" Inside the dressing room, he went straight to his overnight bag and sought inside for the bottle of red breast he'd saved from the rider at the last venue. After twisting off the cap, he took a long swig straight from the bottle. God, it burned. But it was good. So good. He took another swig. It was as he did this that his eyes strayed towards the dressing table, and he lurched backwards in fear. There, laid out on the table, turned on its side so that the face leered straight at him, was the head. The Mr. Herribone head. His first reaction after the initial shock was one of anger. What the fuck is this? Some kind of joke? Does someone think this is funny? Those bastards, they won't make a fool out of me. I'll... He stormed toward the door, but then he halted. How could someone have recreated the Mr. Herribone head so accurately? Moving closer, he bent and sniffed at it. It smelled of death and seawater. He was suddenly sure that this was the original Mr. Herribone head, the one Tommy had been wearing when he fell off that yacht. But how had it got here? And who would have left it here? And why? There was a sharp knock. Jim turned and narrowed his eyes at the door. "Mr. Game, sir, your audience is waiting." "They are they?" He lifted the whiskey bottle and drank deeply from it. Then he wiped one sleeve across his mouth. "Coming," he said. He heard the gruffness in his own voice, the dark tone. Turning to the dressing table, he looked at his own face in the mirror, examining it as if he was seeing it for the last time, or committing it to memory. For a few moments he indulged a fantasy where he would quit the tour and take what remained of his money and go and live a quiet life somewhere. Maybe he'd even change his name, find a nice wife and settle down. But he knew it was the applause he'd miss. The applause. It was like a drug. To stand there on stage and have all those hundreds of people clapping and screaming and whooping just for him. It was a feeling like no other. There was a whisper in his ear. It was Tommy's voice echoing down the years. "We made a deal. He came to me. He told me we could have all the success we'd been chasing for so long. All I had to do was..." Do? Do what? Put the head on? Become Mr. Herribone? So Jim lifted the Mr. Herribone head, the weight of it surprising him. Had it always been so heavy? And hoisted it onto his own shoulders. Inside the head, the damp smell of rot and seawater was even more pronounced. It swamped him, mingling with the smell of whiskey from his own breath, surrounding him with a thick stew of desperation and death. He could barely see out of the eye holes Tommy had punched at the point of Mr. Herribone's nostrils. Is this how it had been for Tommy? Stuck inside this head day after day after day, barely able to make out what was happening on the outside. The knock on the door came again, louder. Jim swiveled around. He heard a voice, muffled by the sackcloth, but laced with impatience. "Mr. Game, sir, it's..." "You deaf?" he shouted with genuine anger. I said I'm coming. But resounding from inside the head, his anger sounded ridiculous, comical. He heard laughter from the other side of the door. Why the hell were they laughing? "We're coming in, sir." Through the eye holes, Jim saw a blur of the door opening and people crowding the door space. He tripped over his bag as he moved towards them, flailed and tottered, knocked over a vase of flowers, and was almost pulled straight over by the weight of the head. All that was missing was some chaotic jazz drumming for a sound effect. He heard someone laughing again. This is it, he thought, electrified by a sudden surge of energy and optimism. This is what people want. Mr. Game, are you ready now?" Jim remained silent. He let them wait. It was all about the timing, after all. "Mr. Game?" "I smell a beef," Jim said. Then again, shouting this time, jubilant, near crazed. "I smell a beef!" People peeled out of his path as he suddenly surged forward out of the dressing room door, along the corridor, and towards the bright lights that awaited him. Here comes Mr. Herribone by Tim Jeffries. Tim Jeffries' novel, The False Ones, was released earlier this year by Crossroads Press. You can find a link to this and more information about Mr. Jeffries and his work on the featured authors page of our website, nocturnaltransmissions.com.au. And now, a message from our friends at the Fear Daily podcast.
Fear Daily is a podcast that takes you into the shadows of the past, unearthing the 1990s most terrifying tales of monsters, madness, and life after death. Discovered on a forgotten bulletin board server somewhere in Pennsylvania's Rust Belt, these stories are an archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experience them. Written by Brennan Storr, creator of the Ghost Story Guys, and hosted by Brandon Scheck-Snyder of Southern Gothic, Fear Daily is your window into the dark corners of our world. Follow Fear Daily today on your favorite podcatcher to receive new episodes Monday through Friday, each and every week.
The Fear Daily podcast. Check it out, gentle listener. And now, it's time to welcome a new acolyte into the Nocturnal Transmissions family, Alex Kerwin. Welcome, Alex. Welcome. Well, I suppose we must away, but not before we've thanked our esteemed cohorts, that pinnacle of ranks amongst our faithful Patreon subscribers. Thank you, Bull Swivney, Jimmy Mack, Amanda Moore, Tim Howard, Alex Brewis, Rebecca Gates, Heathen Soul, Mudkip, Crunchy Kirby, JB, Adam, Evan Dooley, Rachel Brown, Kel Wielden, Drenny, Tippy Polo, Wayne Prince, Johnny Kelly, Robert Troy, Hampton Peterson, Daniel Clanton, Sam Hankins, Jerry Taylor, Daniel Kamiankowski, and Fangora Brown. All non-public domain stories are featured with the permission of the authors. All voices and production are concocted by Kristin Holland. Until next time, as always, watch the skies, fear the dark, and don't trust anyone, especially yourself. Good night, gentle listener.